Happy Sunday. Happy Nurch Day.
Happy, yes.
We be going to church. Come on to Nurch.
Hey, hey, hey. All right now. I know it's early. Wake up. Get the cobwebs out.
Yep. Oh, sleeper, wake up. We coming here to shake you up. I don't know. I guess I'm emboldened by my anonymity. I'm trying to be like the armchair MC.
Yeah, it's all good. Speaking of MCs, we had a couple of great rap moments this week. Common and Pete Rock dropped an album this week. Anticipated album. Eminem's album just dropped. I haven't heard it. I've heard great reviews for Common and Pete Rock's album. So I got to take a road trip so I can listen to that and Eminem's new album, which I have not heard yet.
Yeah.
I have heard some classic lines from it, some Diddy related lines.
I saw a performance of Common with Bilal and Questlove.
Okay.
I guess they did a single from his album. It had a very late 90s, early 2000s vibe to it. So looks like one thing Common isn't trying to do is lean into a newer sound. I guess he's just sticking with what works for him, you know?
Hey, you got to know your audience, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I also saw some pretty hilarious TikToks about Eminem. Where I gotta, one of these days I'll share it with you, Brady. Pretty hilarious.
Okay. But yeah, welcome. Come on in, guys. Come on into the live chat. Greet somebody in a reason's name, and let's get ready to dive in to Nurch.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I've recently become aware of the glories, the splendors, the beauty of matcha. Not only does it awaken you, but it looks healthy even if it isn't. It's all green. You could be drinking liquid nuclear waste. But the green just makes it look like it's healthy, you know?
That's like, that placebo effect, huh? The God effect. I'm gonna start calling the placebo effect the God effect.
Yeah. Isn't it hilarious how something that's extremely healthy is green, and then something that's perceived to be extremely unhealthy is also green? I think it's a more neon green though when it's unhealthy, right? A little bit more neon.
Yeah.
Neon and glowing. Yeah.
Yeah. You want that earth green.
Well, what's up, guys? Come on in. Let's get ready to dive in. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a couple of comments from, I think I'm going to go to last Tuesday's episode of Exit Strategy. And there was a few comments I wanted to just go back through real quick. Let me see here. I had Mike Shannon dropped in and said, great episode. We had a comment from Satan's Guide from the famed
Yes.
Satan's Guide to the Bible dropped in, super chatted and said, once the arguments don't do it for you anymore, it was never about that anyway. Right. And he was actually quoting one of us. I don't know which one of us said that, but
yeah, it was you. It was you, Brady.
Was it? Okay. Daniel Houghton said, one way to describe an apologist is a person who insists you wear rose-colored glasses while reading the Bible. Oh, and keep them on while doing life. Yeah. Should we get some audience feedback? David Divad 777 said, pet peeve incoming. Teasing. That new avatar by Jay Witt is very distracting with all the colors blasting on the screen. Maybe others are distracted by it too. If not, then just ignore me. So you guys can chime in the chat. What do you think about Jay Witt's new avatar? I like it.
It's like the consonants of the Lord. You can't look. No man can see God. Come on,
no
here.
one can be. No one can see Jay Witt's face and concentrate.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
God.
That's actually going to come up today in our Romans 9 reading a little bit in a roundabout way. Let me see, one or two more. Fro Wonders said, "Yo, that whole Pookies and Ray Rays shit just sounds wild racist." And I'm not, and he's quoting the pastor that we were listening to who said, "I'm not saying we should kill these people, quote unquote."
Yes.
Well, shit, that's what the Bible is saying. So
Yeah.
what are you saying
Yeah.
again?
Yeah. Who gives an inch what you think?
Yeah.
Right.
We're talking about God, right?
Yeah. All right, so that's good for last week. Before we dive in, I want to throw something on the screen because I'd like to get a reaction from you guys, from my co-host here. I just want to see what you guys think, because we have some very, very troubling current events that I don't think we can afford to just not mention. So I'll share this and I'll just get a reaction from you guys. This was posted to Facebook. I don't think we understand that today, even those who say they don't believe in God saw God live in action. A bullet grazed a man when it should have done much worse. To deny God's supreme essence is literally a person believing their own lies. There's none like him. All caps. Amen, Al.
Yeah, and if it actually got him straight in the head, it would have been I don't know, his divine providence in that too, right?
Yeah, that's a good. Would that have been Satan in that case? Like, what would you say had the bullet been 3 centimeters to the right?
To the right, right.
Yeah. Jay Witt, are you a believer now? Jay Witt, are you here?
Yeah. He's so speechless that took the wind out of him.
I saw this, I think it was just this morning I saw this, and I said to myself, like, it's so unfalsifiable. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not the bullet misses by 3 inches, if the bullet misses by 3 centimeters, if it struck him. The person who wants to believe can always find a way to spin this into, here's what my God was doing in this event. And when we get into Romans chapter 9 today, what you're going to see is Paul doing much of the same, spinning a historical event into, here's why this does not mean God's not worthy of praise. Here's why we could still say God was active in this situation. To the person who wants to believe, you're always going to be able to spin it. And this is just a believer spinning a situation. What was interesting to me was, under this, I looked at the comments because I wanted to see, okay, well, what are other Christians saying about this? And it was interesting because in the comments of this same post, somebody else commented this. Her name is Tashiana, said, but that same bullet killed someone else.
Exactly.
Okay, so now what do you do, believer? Your God commissioned an angel, a guardian angel, that made sure. What did the angel do? Did the angel spin Trump around? Did the angel blow the bullet? Did the angel tip the barrel of the shooter's gun? What did the angel actually do? Because he's standing behind Trump, but the bullet hit him in the ear. What did the angel actually do to cause this to miss by that little bit? But nonetheless, whatever the angel did, it nonetheless hit someone behind Trump. And so you have to ask yourself, what gives in that situation? Like, does your God care so much about what Trump is doing and so little about this person behind Trump that this person was killed. If you want to give your God credit for the one, you've also got to give your God credit for the other.
Right.
Don't know what you do in that situation. So, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You hear me?
Yeah.
You're back.
Yeah.
I probably spoke over what you were trying to say when I asked you, but if you want to respond to either of those two, Jay Witt, real quick, take a sec. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think I would second what you were saying. It just seems that this is C also or CF dot our episode on NPCs.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
That's what's going on here. People are taking. You remember when the plague came on Jerusalem after David messed up personally, and thousands of people died in David's stead. How the Bible has taught us to think of large groups of people or just other people as
collateral damage.
The pawns on the chessboard. Like it's like, oh, we can as long as they don't affect the king or the queen, we're good, you know. And so in this case, obviously the analogy would be Trump is the king or the queen or whatever, and you can sacrifice a couple insignificant NPCs in the process.
Yeah.
In essence, God's thinking seems to parallel our thinking quite a bit, you know.
Acceptable losses, right? That's the corporations use concepts like that, and it's like, yeah.
But you have to wonder what he means when he says he perceives. Was it Peter says that in the house of Cornelius? I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. Remember when he says that? So it makes you wonder, what does that actually mean? What is it? I mean, please, Christian, if you're there, explain to us. Get in the comments. Tell us, what does it mean that God is no respecter of persons? What does that actually mean when the rubber meets the road?
Well, you know what? For the sake of diving right in, let's let that question linger as we dive into a video to introduce Romans 9.
Yes, sir.
If God is no respecter of persons, think about that. So turn with me in your copy of God's word, in your copy of man's word, about God's word, to Romans chapter 9. And as we get ready to, sorry, I got to share my sound, to dive in, we'll watch this video. I believe I'm sharing sound, but if you guys don't hear it, let me know and I'll start it over. Here he goes.
You know the story of how God loved Jacob but hated Esau. And the Westminster Confession actually says that the predestination for salvation, totally by the grace of God and his mercy for Jacob, but God passed Esau by. You know, that there's a term called just God passed him by. Can you imagine anyone to be passed by God? You're doomed. You know, how would you feel if you were passed by God? You know, this is a whole question of the providence of God. If you and I, or if any one of you got saved, it is because God noticed you. God has mercy on you. God predestined you. God preordained you. And he manifested his inscrutable grace and mercy upon you. Jacob was given over. I mean, not Esau was given over. He just passed by. It's incredible. You know, Dr. Duncan did say, this is my class about Westminster's Confession, say, sometimes the worst thing is the Lord's let you do what you want to do. That's the scariest thing. That means God given you over, given the person over. And God said, I will judge you. And he said it to Pharaoh, to Esau.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My first response is, this has to be divine revelation because no man would write this. Right? That's the apologetic they offer up, right? This isn't an emanation of a man's mind.
Right.
Why would a man write something up that's this unfair? That means it's divine. Its unfairness becomes proof, right? That's an argument people make.
I mean, we've never seen in history where, you know, a father or a mother might choose one child over another, right? That's never ever happened.
People don't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, they don't do that kind of thing.
No, this is not from man. This is from God.
But it's weird because he's talking about God passing over Esau, or as the text says, Jacob I love, Esau I hated. But then he says it's a scary thing. Can you imagine if, hold on, I'm going to play this part again real quick, just real quick.
You want to be passed by? Imagine anyone to be passed by God? You're doomed. You know, how would you feel if you were passed by God?
He says, how would you feel if you were passed by God, as if your feelings have anything to do with it? The point that Paul's making is nothing that you do. He says, before either one of them had done anything good or bad, we're going to get into that. God said, Jacob I love, Esau I hate it. So your actions, your merit, your feelings have nothing to do with it. Why are you asking how would you feel if you were passed by God, as if your feelings would change anything? God could give an F about your feelings.
Right.
He's the one that's choosing, regardless of how you feel.
Well, let me push back a little, Brady, with the believer's perspective. What if this brother here is just, he's an example of a vessel of mercy? You know, when Paul, I'm using Paul's literal words. He's like, what if he did this so that the vessels of mercy? What if this guy here is a real life illustration of what Paul was saying? That this is all done. So yeah, he's imagining, he's musing, he's pondering on, you know, the what if I was passed by. It's to leave a person sitting in their comfortable couch with the blue sky behind them, saying, you know, thank God it wasn't me. You know.
Oh, so rather than asking the person who was passed by how they feel, what he's really saying is to the believer, be glad you don't have to feel that way.
Yeah.
You get to feel the way you feel having not been passed by.
Exactly. Wow. He's an illustration of Paul's point, which is that you get to sit down while drinking your matcha or whatever else and say, well, thankfully it wasn't me.
But the weird thing about that though is, okay, so maybe you're comforting the believer saying you don't have to worry about those scary feelings of having been passed over. But then he goes on to say, the scariest thing is God giving you over to your own desires. So once again, he's still making it seem like this is why I always say Christians do a great job at blaming the victim, because the idea of God giving you over to your own desires, or God's going to judge you for that, as this guy says here at the end, he's still making it seem like it's the person who's passed over, it's their fault, as opposed to it being God's choice to not deal with someone versus dealing with somebody else before either one of them did anything good or evil.
Yeah. It's not like your desire was to choose damnation and was it double predestination? Like, that was it. You never gave him, you say he's turning you over to your desires, but bro, you never gave me a choice.
And the whole focal point on like the feelings of that, like feeling passed over. I mean, you guys mentioned it briefly, but it's like, what good is that? What use is that to even talk about if he truly believes what he believes? You know, it's like you could stand. Basically, you're just standing on the shoreline and you're just like looking at the people being consumed in a storm on a ship, and you know, you're not doing anything to help, I guess, but it's or maybe he is, but it's like what's the benefit here? What's the why even talk about it? Yeah,
it's gore porn. It's like true crime obsession, where it's like you want the gory details just so you can get like from your point of safety, like a clear view of the gore of it all, right? And actually feel kind of better off, even though nothing has changed in your situation. You feel even better because Is that experiment you were talking about? How when people could torture the other person, I think it was back in the 50s. It's like some sort of feeling of safety that's exacerbated or enlarged by the fact that you can see the other person suffering more. You know, like remember what they said when there was a correlation between the physical suffering, or at least the thought that the other person was, that people pushed it more or something. So it's like it's almost like God has pre-programmed us for that, and He's given us the ultimate gore porn of like eternal damnation.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to see something weird here, because I don't think it's just gore porn where you're watching other people suffer, because Paul's going to make it seem like you guys said a minute ago, like you're not doing anything about their suffering. Paul's actually going to make it seem like if he could, he would, which makes it even worse, because, well, God could, but he won't.
Right.
So let's dive in here to Romans chapter 9.
So Paul's like, I'm basically God's moral better.
Exactly. That's what I was going to try to demonstrate here. But let's dive in. I'll read. You guys stop me where you want to stop. Oh, and by the way, if you're here with us on this Sunday morning, please take a second to like, subscribe if you're not subscribed, drop a comment, and we would appreciate that.
We should announce. Announce that. Go ahead.
You talking about this week?
Yeah.
Let's save it. Let's
okay.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We do have an announcement. Yeah, we do have an announcement coming. But yeah, stick with us. All right, Romans chapter 9. Verse 1.
That was a little premature. Are we doing the recap?
Oh, you know what? I don't even have the recap. Let's just dive in.
Okay,
Albert, you think you could catch us 1 through 8 just really within a minute? You think you got it?
Oh my God.
1 through 8, or just take us through 8. Take us from 8 into 9.
It's 8:24 in the morning, man. Come on. Spring it on me last minute. Come on.
All right, I got you guys. All right.
Okay, come on.
Last week, we in chapter 8.
You're not going to give yourself the music? We can't hear the music.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I thought you guys could hear it. Just a second, let me share it.
Okay.
See, that's why I thought I was interrupted. Okay, here, let me see. Because you're sharing the screen.
Oh yeah. Yep,
right.
Sorry.
So yeah, let me share this. Like I would give them about a good 45 seconds to a minute recap.
Okay.
All right, did you free it up for me?
You got it.
Okay. All right, let me see. All right, audio. Okay. Here we go. So, all right, let me make sure you guys can hear this. You got it?
Here we go.
All right, here we go. Last week, on Nurch, we discussed the assurance that the Christian had that all things, by the way, this would have been an etiology for life itself, that all things were working together essentially for the Christian's good. Now, this week, we will go into looking at how a Christian can be further assured, not only in this life, but that in the next life, he can glory in the fact that the exact opposite is happening for those who are not Christians.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's go here. Back to the share, Blingo, and Blammo. All right, I'll read. You guys stop me where you need to, or if I feel like I need to comment, I'll stop.
Absolutely.
Romans chapter 9, verse 1. I am speaking the truth in Christ. I am not lying. That sound, I'm just right off the bat. It's a little weird to come in with this double affirmative. Hey, trust me, you can trust me. I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. Sounds like a car salesman here a little bit.
The fact that he's had to say, the fact that he had to say in Christ, it's like, was that necessary? You know?
Right.
Yeah. I swear to God, I ain't shitting you.
Yeah. I'm speaking the truth in Christ. I am not lying. My conscience bears me witness in the Holy Spirit. So he's really putting God's name on this. Isn't this a little like the, not taking the Lord's name in vain here? Like you're throwing out a lot of swears here to get people to trust that you're not capping.
Exactly.
I guess it doesn't count as in vain if what you're saying is true, I guess.
I guess. Right. So he's taking the Lord's name, just not in vain. My conscience bears me witness in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow and
Mhm.
unceasing anguish in my heart.
Come on.
For I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brethren, my kinsmen by race, or as the old King James would say, my kinsmen in the flesh.
Mm.
And this is what I meant a minute ago when I said, this is not just gore porn. It's not just reveling in the fact that other people are being cast off while you're safe, because he's saying, man, I wish I could be accursed so that my kinsmen in the flesh by race, they could be saved. And we're going to talk about, does this make Paul more compassionate than God? We'll get there in a second. They are Israelites, and to them belong the sonship, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and of their race, according to the flesh, is the Christ. God, who is over all, be blessed forever. Amen.
Come on here. that making you guys feel for your previous Christian selves? Is it sort of, are you feeling the unction?
Well, as a Gentile believer, when I used to read this, I used to say, I did kind of engage in that I guess I try to be compassionate, but also celebrate a little bit, because I'm like, yo, these people were cut off so that I could be grafted in. And Paul, he would even himself be cursed so that the Jews could actually get the thing that I get to enjoy as a believer. So I used to like read this intro here and say, man, this really must be a great salvation that I get to be a part of. If Paul would take the curse, he would take it on the chin. He would take one for the team, just so that the rest of his people, according to the flesh, could benefit from the thing that I now get the benefit from.
Yeah, it kind of this whole added a lot of weight to me. Yeah, like in terms of how he tries to build that argument, but he's definitely leaning on that emotional kind of hook, and it felt convincing. Yeah, at the time. Yeah, I was like that. Yeah, that's crazy. Like you're willing to be cast into hell for if you can kind of just save the rest of your kinsmen.
Yeah.
I mean, it felt noble. It felt felt authentic. It felt right. I'm sure Jay Witt, you had similar feelings about this text, right? So
it sounds like an ego trip to me. That's what I'm hearing.
But back then, did it sound like an ego trip back then?
I not back then, but right now when I listen to it, I'm thinking like, it's almost like saying I have bad luck. It's like you have to think that you're that important to the scheme of the universe to think that, what if I could be sacrificed for all of me? I mean, come on, man. Like, what are we like? It takes a certain ego to even think of that. You have to think of yourself pretty highly to even like, how would that even make any sense? I mean, it's almost like a God, like it's like a Messiah.
Well, no, but I mean, that's a very interesting point, though. You say it's almost like a Messiah complex, but as you were talking, I'm sitting here saying, but wait, isn't that what the Messiah was supposedly doing? Wasn't he sacrificing himself for all these other people? Why do you now have to do it too?
But like again, it makes sense if he is the person that Paul says he is. It makes no sense for Paul to even think that, you know what I mean? Like if Paul's saying this is God come to humanity to redeem humanity, it makes perfect sense that self-sacrifice could save humanity. There is no world, even in Paul's own world, where it makes sense that he could think he could swap himself out in that way and say,
Jay, I'm going to push back on that, Jay.
Go ahead.
Because think about people, parents who see a child kind of, maybe dealing with, who has cancer, right? Or a family member, like you have a brother and sister who's suffering immensely. people that you really love, and if they're suffering, you know, there is a natural tendency to, yeah, like I wish I could take your place,
Mm,
right? But
Yeah, but
what
you,
no, so let me finish. But I think the last thing I'm going to say is that like that's really a trauma response,
mm,
right? Like Paul, who used to be Saul, right? Who
mm,
went through, you know, had this experience, and then now he's trying to rationalize like how this makes sense in the grand scheme of God's promises. And he's actually this could actually be qualified as like Paul is actually going through some serious religious trauma.
mm,
But
mm,
and it's couched in this kind of rhetoric, but it's like maybe he's not aware of that at all, like how like this has actually damaged him like far
mhm,
more
mhm.
than,
So
you
you're saying
know.
this brilliant scheme that he's come up with
Yeah,
to make the promises of God from the Old Testament not be null, but he's
right.
kind of got to do this new thing with them. So he's got
Yeah,
to draft the Gentiles in
yeah,
too, and whatever he's
yeah.
doing in Romans to make this new quasi-Judaistic, but now Christ-centered religion. You're saying he's now feeling what he has to pay for that is the loss
Mm-hmm.
of being able to call the Jews
Mm-hmm.
his kinsmen in the spirit
Yeah,
because he's now made it not about the flesh anymore.
yeah.
And this is sort of a
And
traumatic
it's
response.
a traumatic response. And is he going to give God credit for that traumatic response in the way that, right? In the way that we've talked about, right? It's
Mm,
like, you know, where, you know, like he's basically just as brainwashed as any
mm.
other, you know, dogma believing, you know, Christian or Jewish person.
Jay Witt, your
So,
response?
I mean, I think Al makes a really good point, and just how traumatic this soteriological scheme
Mm,
ends up being for
mm,
Paul. And maybe this is a natural emotive kind of,
mm.
it may not be thoroughly logical, but it's an emotional response to, I mean,
Yeah.
because if you consider how just the infinite greatness of I mean, there are significant differences between a parent wanting to see their offspring, which they see as an extension of themselves, live beyond themselves. I mean, that's the wish of any parent. No parent wants to bury their own child. So rather than see, so the parent who says, "I wish it was me," and said, it's still a little selfish. It's like I would rather not. I'd rather the child see me die than me have to see my child die. And there's some part of me that lives through my child. So I think that's.
Mm.
But when you're looking
Well,
at this situation,
if I could just interject real quick, keep in mind, Paul never, ever uses any of the Greek words for hell. Not Gehenna, not Tartarus.
mm-hmm.
Paul never mentions hell. So when he's
Mm,
talking about people suffering, Paul has a very earthly eschatology in terms of what's going to happen. It's going
right.
to like the suffering is going to happen on the earth. The
Mhm.
the God meting out the punishment for sin and terror for every soul that worketh evil. All that is things that are going to happen in this life. So Paul's even when he talks about taking the place of his kinsman according to the flesh here, he's not thinking hell. He's thinking being cut off from what Christ is going to do in terms of his own eschatology here, not necessarily some eternal hell situation.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
no, that's well said. And lest we get bogged down with this point at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
I'll give up the floor. But I think it was worthy for Al to interject and me say
Oh
what I
yeah,
said, and let the listener kind of like hash this
yeah,
through. What do you think?
yeah. I love the point that Al just made because as I was reading this to get ready for this, I just started reading it this morning. As I was reading these first couple of verses, I said, man, to the person that wants to say Paul is a construction of the Roman Empire to sort of just take over Judaism and sort of usurp it, this seems to be a very genuine concern being voiced here. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how you make Paul just a literary construct of
Mhm.
Rome and be taking all of these the nuance of all these emotions into account.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
seems to be somebody going through it, and I didn't have the wherewithal to think the way Albert just did, which is to say this is a traumatic response to
Mhm.
what this new religious idea of his is doing
Yeah,
to his former faith. I love that.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously, I would say, upon reading it even today, I believe that there's clearly a historical figure behind this. I don't even think this is a committee. I think
Yeah.
Right.
actually
Right.
there seems to, like when you listen to the way the arguments are made up until from chapter one up until now, there's a consistency in the way the author is thinking that makes me think this isn't just some scheme a committee drew up. This is the way an individual thought through this. Even the need for these ideologies throughout, like
Yeah.
you see a consistent, yeah.
Motive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Verse 6. But it is not as though the word of God had failed. So this is where I say this is Paul trying to show that something that God has been up to is God hasn't failed. God's promises haven't failed. Even though I'm bringing you a new schema, God's still moving forward with what he was always doing. Verse 6, but it is not as though the word of God had failed, for not all who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, and not all are children of Abraham because they are his descendants. But, and then he quotes, through Isaac shall your descendants be named. This means that it is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise are reckoned as descendants. Any of you guys want to break down what he's getting at here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see you shaking your head, so I think you want to talk about it, right?
It's a little, once again, as we have challenged Paul's
His logic.
logical faculties, he does not really break things down technically. He's basically answered. I know he doesn't mean it this way, but at face value, I think what he's done is just he said that you are chosen through the flesh, though not of the flesh, but through the flesh anyway. I mean, it's a little bit like, okay, but you haven't described the mechanism. You haven't described, and when I read this last night, I kept reading and I thought, okay, maybe he does. Like, there's a nugget somewhere. I don't think there is, but yeah, we can, Jay, but if you can respond, and then we can kind of see if you guys think differently. But
well, yeah. I almost saw him as creating a synthesis here between two seemingly opposing or antithetical streams of thought, because he later broadens or elucidates this further when he speaks of the promise to Abram being that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. In other words, innumerable descendants. And then I think it was in Isaiah talking about if I hadn't left you a remnant, I believe it was Isaiah. It was one of the prophets. If he hadn't left them, there would have been no remnant. So there's the idea of scarcity in terms of soteriological scarcity, and then soteriological abundance. And these are more or less antithetical streams of thought, at least in Paul's mind. And what he seeks to do with what happens here in this chapter is to synthesize both of them, make them both work, and have like almost overlapping strata or something, like it's like on the one hand, it is a remnant. So he makes the remnant actual Israel, and then the abundance is the spiritual Israel, so that they overlap, and so that the remnant, which is I may have said that wrong, but the remnant, which is actual Israel, and then the broadening the Gentile promise, where the scarcity or the remnant is accounted for via the Isaiah kind of passage, where it's like, if I hadn't left the remnant when it happened, it's still accounted for within the same scheme that allows for the broader. You see how he said this is his attempt at synthesizing, because he's saying it's really at the heart of it is this issue of election. And so that whether you're in Israel or you're a Gentile, it's you being elected that makes you the descendant, so that both promises can be true. So he synthesizes both of them with a larger doctrine, which I guess you could say the glue of this synthesis is the doctrine of election or predestination.
Election and promise. God makes a promise to Abraham, that you're going to have descendants who are going to get this blessing, But Paul makes the point that, I guess in the Old Testament, I don't know if the same point was being made, but you do see Abram trying to fulfill God's promise a different way, not through Sarah, but through Sarah's handmaiden. So now you have, you have these offsprings who are not going to be part of the promise. So they're children of Abraham, but they're not the children of promise. So Paul is going to use that as a motif to say, oh, so there can be people who come from Abraham who are not caught up in this promise. What's weird is all the people who came from Abraham that are caught up in the promise in the Old Testament are Jews.
Are Jews.
Now he's going to remove the Jews from that and say, hey, but we did see this principle where people can come from Abraham and not be part of the promise, right? Well, guess what? Even the Jews are going to fall victim to this motif. You're from him, but you're not from him.
So the thing is, when God saved the Israelites from slavery through the Exodus, why didn't he just choose the ones of the promise instead? And why did he have to get everybody?
Yeah.
Well, Paul does. I would laugh at this if I didn't think it was sort of brilliant. I think it is kind of brilliant because Paul ends up, what he does in answer to what you're saying, Brady, there, he allegorizes the two descendants of Abraham.
Yes.
And he makes it about flesh as opposed to promise.
Yes.
So he's saying that the promise is spiritual in nature and that it can only be wrought by supernaturalism. And that is, the reanimating of Sarah's womb. And then he makes the Hagar's child, Ishmael, he makes that flesh. In other words, this is a thing that could have been accomplished without supernatural intervention. And thus he allegorizes that, pulls out from that descendants of the spiritual and descendants of flesh. Now he has a larger motif that he can work with.
Yeah.
And in this, he can take that. This is, whether you're a Christian or not, this is a smart man.
For social engineers, this is smart social engineering.
Right.
Because he's also allegorized the entire nation of Israel.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, we beat up on him for his logic, but for his theology here and his ability to shrewdly find motifs within the original story that he can use and parlay for larger themes. Right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and I was going to say, and I think a key point here is that I think why was rhetoric such an important thing before the scientific age, right? Because the how you persuade people was, how you composed and constructed words to get, a visceral, response. I guess I don't know. I don't know what it was like with the Greeks. Maybe the Greeks had a different idea. But it's like with the scientific age, it's a very different kind of landscape, right? It's like rhetoric today still works in the political sphere. It works in maybe the TED Talk sphere to some degree. But when you start to talk about scientific facts, when you talk about pure logic, those are extremely boring. They're very technical. It takes a long time to understand sometimes, certain domains through that kind of linguistic formulation. But it's like what I'm trying to say, Jay Witt, is I agree with you, and I think Brady, you had a great qualifier for it. But this is kind of what they had historically. But like the scientific age really it changed everything, because no longer, now you can have somebody go through the entire describe an equation of a certain problem set, and that really that describes reality, and that describes the persuasiveness has changed, the criteria for what is considered persuasive today.
Well,
and
if I think
that's
I would say it's not just rhetoric, it's storytelling. What he's doing here is he's telling a story,
absolutely
a familiar story, but now he's telling it a different way. And what we're going to see is he's going to begin to quote from Old Testament passages, and he's going to quote them completely out of context. But he's pulling them into this new story that he's telling, that, as we said a minute ago, is creating this new paradigm for religion that's even causing himself to have these emotional reactions to, hey, I know this isn't what we expected, but this is how the story is going to go from now on.
Right. Right.
He's like a good director, or like a movie. Like it's almost like he's putting a movie together based on a common story or myth in the culture, and he's like, all right, you guys already know this myth, but did you see these sort of themes that you could pull out of that myth? And then it ends up being able to advance the myth into a new era. It's like the development of certain technologies, or you have the development of, you see the technology of sound capturing music advancing, getting digital. You also see the parallel development of phones, where it starts becoming, and then at some point there's a synthesis of the two, and then you have this device in your hand, which then opens a whole new vista, where now you can have the internet and all kinds of other things, and sharing, and it's like, but it took those two, and like the kernel of those two things to give birth to this new flourishing plant. And I honestly believe that what Paul is doing, he's taking a story that's sort of like those kernels of, you have the parallel technologies kind of going, and he's keen enough to see in them, this is overlapping strata. Like, I can make these two create something that's a synthesis of the two, and it fits perfectly with his mission. His mission is to and do it so expertly that people think that it was constructed by the Roman Empire. You got to give the guy some props.
Well, but here's the thing. I wouldn't say do it so expertly, though, because as we're about to see, the way he does it, like, you got to think about, why did many Jews not become Christians? Because he wasn't doing it so expertly. If he had done it so expertly, all the Jews would have become Christians. But many Jews looked at what he was doing and saying, that's not what that Old Testament, that the Hebrew Bible is saying. That passage that you're pulling is no. And so you would get more Gentiles coming into this religion, because they may not have the wherewithal to challenge the way Paul's using the Hebrew Bible. So it's not done so expertly for people who are experts in Judaism.
Yeah. Unless I seem like I'm praising him too much. I mean, I just want to give props. I mean, there's a tendency on our side of things, counter apologetics, to not acknowledge. Like when there's brilliant thought going on the other side, and I think part of not coming across bias is being able to be like, all right, after you took it on the chin to shake the guy's hand after that round and be like, yeah, you got me there. That was good. But you're still going to lose this bout. But it's a good one, Paul. It's a good one.
All right.
Good stuff.
I'm going to backtrack, and then we'll go a little bit forward. Verse 8. This means that it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise are reckoned as descendants. For this is what the promise said: about this time I will return, and Sarah will have a son. And not only so, but also when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of his call, she was told, the elder will serve the younger, as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So once again, he's telling their story. Our forefathers, right? The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, they both had situations where they had children, and one of their children was chosen and the other was not. So get this in your system, guys. It's possible for people to come from our forefathers and not be children of the promise. So when I start making this thing about who all is God electing, and I start including Gentiles, just know it's possible for people who are physically Israel to not be part of what God's really up to. That's really what Paul is doing here. That was in summation. Any thoughts before we go further?
No.
All right.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Verse 14. What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy.
And I will there.
Okay.
Right there.
Here it comes. Here it comes.
Now, I do have a thought about this. I'm sure you guys do too.
Okay.
We talked about this in the Rico case. So for all those who are listening to this particular episode, maybe you might, after this episode, want to go back to our Rico case. We referenced this particular passage, but I'm throwing this out there. I don't know if you guys had a similar thought, but when I was reading through it this time, so he asked the question: is there injustice in God? And then the answer is essentially this. This is my paraphrase of the answer. No, because he tells you he's going to be unfair before.
Mm.
Yeah.
So and
Right.
this is my argument. It's not quite an argument. My observation, I'll put it. Impartiality is not a thing which is defined by you merely having to announce beforehand that you will behave in a certain way.
Right.
If you have something to say, if you have to say something untrue about a set of events, and when confronted, simply say, "I told you I would be free to swap out the facts." This doesn't negate your untruthfulness.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you understand what I'm saying? So like you don't establish that you're not being untruthful by telling people in advance, "Hey, I'm going to be untruthful. I'm just letting you know." And then when you do, you say, and somebody says, "Hey, wait a second, that's not true what you're saying." You say, "Well, I told you ahead of time I was going to be lying." Well,
Right.
that's not how it works, right? So
In the same way.
In the same way.
I'm just giving you an illustration so you can see how ridiculous this argument is. When you see something unfair and then a person says, "Well, he did tell us in advance that he was going to be unfair," you are not answering the charge. You're just saying that he told you in advance that he was going to be unfair. You get what I mean?
Yeah. And when you go back to where this is drawn from Exodus, I think 33. It's a weird thing that's happening because there's all kind of cap going on in Exodus 33. There's a story being told about God telling Israel, "I'm not going to go up with you all, because if I do travel with y'all, I'm gonna end up killing y'all because y'all are that irksome to me." Like the God in Exodus 33 is so impetuous and so impatient and so intolerant that he says, "If I'm going to travel with Israel, they're such a stiff-necked people that I would kill them. So I'm not going to travel with them." Moses says, "Yo, if you don't go with us, we've got no assurance that we're going to be good. Can you at least go with me? Show me yourself." And then God says, this is a very interesting thing that's happening here. God says to Moses, "Okay, I'm not going with y'all, but I'm going to show myself to you. I'm going to have mercy on who I'm going to have mercy. I'm going to have compassion on whom I have compassion." So God chooses in that passage to have mercy on Moses and show himself to Moses. Paul, divine prerogative. Paul uses this as his proof text to say, see, God has no compulsion, he has no obligation to be merciful to everyone.
Yeah.
He's going to have mercy on whoever he wants to have mercy on. So then it's not that God's being just or unjust, as Jay Witt is saying. God is just saying, "I'm going to be me. I'm going to do what I want. I'm not concerned about whether or not this is just or unjust. I don't have to play by those rules."
And let alone, like, it sounds like there was a negotiation happening, right, with Moses, right? So it's not like it's completely out of our volition entirely, it seems, right? So it's like it's a strange way to argue your point. And I don't,
So
and you do
go ahead, Joette.
You do nothing for the charge that a system is unfair. If we say, "Okay, there's systemic injustice here," and then you say, "Yeah, I told you I was going to set it up with systemic," that's not answering the charge that the system is unjust. Like, to just simply say, "That's the way I'm going to do the system," you're just underscoring my point. You're being unfair. You're not answering it. I shouldn't laugh.
No.
Punctuate that with laughter, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. He wants his readers to know it's not unlike God to just simply make a choice to have mercy on some, not others, to love some, not others, to elect some, not others. It's not unlike God to do that. This is how we became a nation, right? This is how God works. So when I start talking about who God's choosing and not choosing, who God's electing and not electing, who God's cutting off and grafting in, don't act like it's not like God to do these kinds of things. This is how God gets down.
Fairness and impartiality don't work by those rules. And you get to do that as an individual, but you don't get to then say, I'm no respecter of persons.
Right.
Like you don't get, you can't have it both ways. You can say, hey, it would have been better to just say, I am not obligated to be impartial, but you can't do this and then tell me I'm impartial. It's like, this is a definition of partiality and unfairness.
Right.
Yeah. You know, like you can't, there's no way to quite synthesize those two, and to just come back and say, well, he's going to, we'll get into that. I don't want to get, because he's going to get into arguing for why this makes sense, and I'm going to argue against it.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
I have some, but I'll save it for a little bit later. Yeah.
Okay. 19. You will say to me then, well, why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who are you? I like the old King James. Who are you, oh man? The RSV says, but who are you, a man, to answer back to God?
I see what you're doing. Oh, hold on a second. I'm sorry, Brady. Because I see you're kind of moving in chunks of through the passage. Okay, so I did have a comment on that.
Did I skip something?
Yeah, you skipped.
I'm sorry. Whoa. Yeah. My bad. I don't want to skip that at all. I'm sorry. We'll go back. I'll start over at 15. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So it depends not upon man's will or exertion, but upon God's mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for the very purpose of showing my power in you, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. So then, he has mercy upon whom he wills, and he hardens the heart of whomever he wills. Go ahead.
So there, I thought it was important to go back to Exodus 9. And interestingly enough, it's both Exodus 9 and Romans 9 here. Exodus 9, the thrust of that statement is not about Pharaoh's damnation, but rather to indicate why he had allowed Pharaoh to live instead of simply killing him.
Wait. Break that down a little bit more.
Okay, so and in summary, basically, God's achievement of his naturalistic soteriology here, that is rescuing Israel, saving them from Egypt, right? His explanation for doing it by a circuitous route, that is through the many plagues and not simply just killing off the enemy, is to say, no, I didn't kill you off and just do what I could have done much easier. I actually didn't do that for this purpose. I wanted to show my power in you, or through it's not so much in you, but through this situation, utilize the situation to exhibit the manifold kind of power and glory that I have.
I'm going to show off on you. I'm
particularly going to use the situation of you being resistant to this to show off through. And that's the reason. So the question is, this is similar to why this is a similar question that people have when the answer from theodicy is, well, God's ways are higher than ours, or whatever, where people are like, whoa, why does he allow for this? Why does he, and people's answer is a similar kind of thing. Well, there's obviously a reason that God has for this. It's greater than that which we already know, right? So it's like, why is he not just killing Pharaoh and then they would necessarily, why did he just, why instead of using a flood to destroy the world, then he just killed the wicked people and you don't have to kill all, this now collateral damage of all of these. Well, no, I'm going to show you by virtue of this circuitous means I use to bring about my salvation that I am powerful. And it's going to be a manifold manifestation of my power. Whereas if I just killed him, it would have been a lesser degree of manifestation, essentially. So I'll read that again. I said, initially in Exodus 9, the thrust of that statement is not about Pharaoh's damnation, but rather to indicate why he had allowed Pharaoh to live instead of simply killing him. He provided a reason for the circuitous cycle of plagues.
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, Jaywood, is that you're describing in some sense someone who is willing to make someone suffer immensely, and in a sense, it as a way to demonstrate his authority and power, and that in some sense he he revels in that. He thinks that that's.
But it's not the suffering. It's just, I didn't kill you off. You see, Paul is making this. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go. No, continue your thought. Yeah, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from.
So Paul is using this to say he's going to later talk about pottery and so forth, but he's basically saying he's got people on this planet for a very specific reason. Some for ignoble, some for noble. Right? He's using a passage that's not making that point. The point that's being made by Exodus 9 isn't that. The point of Exodus 9 is it looks like this is a circuitous route towards salvation, but I have a reason, like Brady just said, I'm actually using this situation to flex. It's Muhammad Ali in the boxing ring doing all of the other antics. It's like, yo, why don't you just knock the guy out?
Just knock him out.
Why are you whirling your arm around and taunting the guy? He's like, I'm showing you that I can do this easily. You know, I'm trying to make you aware that I'm able to do this, and it's no sweat off my back, and that's what I'm utilizing you for. And so that's what Exodus 9 is making it. But then Paul takes that and he makes it into a whole other thing. He makes it about, I have a right to raise up people for this purpose and people for that purpose. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Which it's kind of dastardly, though, to introduce this idea, because this does get into the whole idea of gore porn, because now you start making it seem like, well, then the people who are perishing, the people who are, even if they're prospering, but they're wicked, and God's going to one day get them. You sort of set people up to look at the world in this way where you're like, basically, so who is God? Who does God love and who does God hate? Who are the Jacobs and who are the Esau's? Who has God chosen? And who are the people that we should sort of just sit back and, like you guys said earlier, watch from the shoreline as God gets ready to destroy them? And now, Paul, for the Jews, is saying, I wish I could be a curse for their sake. But for the most part, you don't look at Pharaoh and say, I wish I could be a curse so that Pharaoh could be saved. You look at the Pharaoh saying, I can't wait for God to destroy them, because God probably only raised them up for the purpose of being destroyed.
Right. Yeah.
There are people in the world that God simply must hate.
Yeah, come on.
The Esau's. And there are other people that God must love. And it's really just, we gotta just have to sit back and watch and wait to figure out who's who. Which is why I titled the episode the way that I did. So it's not that God so loved the world. In a very real way, we could say to a large portion of humanity, the unelect, the non-elect. Look at the way we ended Romans chapter 8, right? Those whom God foreknew, those he called and predestined and elected and justified and glorified. Those whom he did not, the Jacobs, the Esau's, the Pharaohs, we could really say God so hated the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's double predestination. It's double predestination.
Or yes, but God hates the majority of the world.
Yeah. We made that point previously too.
Yeah.
Like, what did I say? If you're going to, I had a phrase for this. I was talking about, summarizing coming up with a dispositional metonym. I said this in an episode many times, about a year ago, I think. I use the phrase dispositional metonym. If you're going to come up with that, why would it be the thing that's actually lesser degree or lesser percentage of your disposition? I made that point many episodes ago. If you end up hating more people than you love, why would you use the metonym for your disposition? Why would it be love? Why would you be like, God is love, but most people get the hate side of God? Why, that doesn't make sense. It's like if you're going to make something a mascot for a mascot for your disposition, you're going to use the thing that's more prevalent, not the thing that's in lesser degree. And if we look at humanity, even Christ is broad is the way that leads to destruction, right? So why would you say Jehovah saves as your name? Like Yeshua. Why would that be your name if you're actually only saving a remnant or a few? Why wouldn't it be Jehovah condemns? You're making the metonym is based on the thing that's lesser in your disposition, not the thing that's more prevalent.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. And it was wild, Jay. I would love to go back and listen to some of our older episodes because you're right. I just remembered you did make that point, and that's something I wish that we would harp on more, based on the way God is presented in the Bible. There are things that we should be saying about Bible God that we give him the benefit of the doubt for being all these other things that a minority of humanity is going to experience if the Bible is true. The large swath of humanity is going to experience a hidden God, an illogical God, an evil God. You know what I mean? So that's the God of the Bible for the majority of humanity.
Yeah. For those who don't understand what you're saying, I'm sure Jeffrey Dahmer may have given out some treats on Halloween to some kids or something. Right. I'm sure occasionally he left a decent tip at a restaurant. But he's not known for being the generous guy who tips or the guy who's generous on Halloween. He's known as Jeffrey Dahmer, the guy who's the serial killer who eats people. Right. And why is he known by that? It's fitting that he should be known by that because that's the theme of his life. Yeah. It's not the fact that he was this generous. And to further make that point, whenever you do have a philanthropist like Epstein or somebody who, no matter how many good things you've done, you've donated to donated to schools. They said, your money perish with you fucking freak. Like, we're going to take back our honorary degree that we gave you. Why? Because the stuff you've done that is bad outweighs the stuff that you did that's good. So we can't say that you're this. Same thing goes for Bill Cosby. We can't say you were this generous philanthropist, even though you were. Why? Because your character or your disposition, your traits are more dominated by the evil you've done than the good. So why is it that God gets off this way? Why is it that billions of people get to go into perdition just so that your glory in soteriology can be seen, but you become known. So it's Bill Cosby becoming known as the philanthropist even after we knew him to be a rapist. It's Diddy becoming, after we've seen the video of him beating Cassie down, we're saying, no, he's not that dude. He's the dude who gave to charter schools. Fuck out of here. No, like if most of humanity is lost, do your soteriological scheme. Right.
And hold on. You said if most of humanity is lost through your God, through your soteriological scheme, not through their choice, not through their rebellion, not through anything that they have done. Paul's whole point here is this is God's doing, regardless of anything the human. Let me go back and just read it real quick. Verse 16. Verse 16, so it depends not upon, verse 15. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So it depends not upon man's will or exertion, but upon God's mercy. I mean, keep going. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I have raised you up for the very purpose. And let me just add this. I may say more about it in chapter 11, but the idea of hardening Pharaoh's heart, hardening someone's heart is actually, this is great because he's going to get into this in the very next verses. That's actually pottery language.
Right.
You harden something because it was once soft and moldable.
Yep.
So to harden Pharaoh's heart means it's using pottery language, but you have to first fashion pottery before you harden it to use it. You don't fashion pottery and use it. You have to put it in a kiln, in an oven, and harden it first. So really what Paul's going to say in the next verses, this is not me spicing anything up. God doesn't just harden Pharaoh's heart, he fashions it. He molds the clay. Then he turns on the oven to harden it in that position so that he can use it for the purpose he wanted. So once again, this is not people's choices. This is not God honoring, oh, you wanted to rebel me, as the guy we played at the beginning in the video says. This is not God giving you what you want. If what Paul is saying is true, God fashioned these people to be the way that they are, then hardened them so that they could not. Because remember the story in Exodus, even Pharaoh was trying to get out of what he would rebuke God, but then he would change his mind. Like, no, you know what? No, I'm gonna let him go. No, God was like, no, I can't have you switching up your heart, Pharaoh. I fashioned you to be a certain way. I'm going to harden your heart because I need you to be that way so that I can show my power against you.
Come on. Yeah.
So this is God's doing.
Yep. Yeah. And Brady, by the way, I think this is a perfect place to drop the second video so people can see that as we go into our next points.
All right, hold on. I got to get it ready here.
Just a quick question as you're pulling that up, Brady. Isn't the hardening of the heart, though, a reference to the Old Testament where it talks about the heart of stone versus the heart of flesh? Isn't that what Paul is kind of referring to? Not so much the pottery analogy.
Look,
heart of stone versus the heart of flesh.
Yeah, heart of flesh.
I still think even in that, there's the idea of what's moldable and what's not.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah,
but like I said, okay.
I was just going to say there's a bit of prose going on. He's being a bit poetic here.
Right.
With the way he's because I can't wait till we get to the pottery part. But I think we should drop it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll play this video real quick, and I got some super chats I need to read as well, and then we got an announcement about some new things for exit strategy. So here goes. If you don't hear it, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to let it play.
Look, if you try to understand God based on your human knowledge, you're going to never know God. God says, my ways are not...
Hold on. Based on your human knowledge, is there some other kind of knowledge that we have? Okay.
And Brady, and so the audience knows, I really respect the way Brady summarizes the point this guy is going to make, and I asked him to summarize it again for the audience after we look at this video, because this is the consistent refrain you hear back from Christians when passages like the passage we're reading get subjected to actual scrutiny, and we're able to show how it doesn't make any sense, it doesn't work. This is what they say, and this does the job for a lot of people. But I think the way Brady's going to respond to this will help you see how the inescapability of the very thing he's describing at the very beginning of this video.
Look, if you try to understand God based on your human knowledge, you're going to never know God. God says, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. I'm different. To follow God, you must say, God, I don't know. I need to know. And only if you will let me know can I really know. I need to know from your perspective, not from my own.
Come on, Brady.
That's damnable. That's damnable for several reasons. And hopefully I'll get to the point that you wanted me to make, Jay, with. First, this idea of my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. If you zoom the camera lens out and ask yourself, who's writing that? A human being is writing that. So this idea of my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways, you don't have some higher dimension being saying this. You have a human being, at least, even if you don't agree with me, if you're a Christian theist, you at least have a human being writing this. Now, you might think a God revealed this to the human, but you have a human writing that their thoughts are not your thoughts and their ways are not your ways. Now, you think they're speaking for a God, so maybe a God can say that. But a human can't say that, right? A human could say that, and you'd say to the human, "Oh, you're like me. You breathe like me. You have experiences like me. If I prick you, do you not bleed?" Right? So your thoughts are not my thoughts. I mean, sure, we can have some different ways of thinking, but you're going to have human ways of thinking. My human knowledge is all I have. Your human knowledge is all you have.
Yep.
If there's no God in this picture, no one gets to say my ways are higher than your ways, as the heavens are higher than the earth. But the idea of lean not to your own understanding is a very circuitous way of thinking. If I tell you lean not to your own understanding, guess what you have to do to understand those words? You have to lean on your own understanding to even understand what that means.
Yeah.
So you can't obey me without disobeying me.
That comedic timing was great. I loved it.
Yeah. It's almost like an inescapable solipsism.
Yeah.
Like tied up there, right? Like it's an impossibility. And I might, for those who want to kick back philosophically at that, look, you don't have we have an organ to think with. It's our brain. And there's no such thing of me swapping my brain out for Albert's brain or for Brady's brain or for any other person's brain. Like I have to use what I have.
Understand, not with your understanding.
So you know what's interesting? I think that pastors tend to unconsciously or consciously, I should probably consciously, use the pulpit as a way to deflect. Like I'm sure they're getting a lot of emails. Their constituents are going up to them and saying like, this doesn't make any sense, Pastor. Why are you like this passage says here or there or that? And then he's kind of like frustrated. He's just like, okay, I'm just gonna not deal with this. Like what he considers to be BS, right? So he just say it on the pulpit, and then he'll cast it in a way where it's like you're not a good Christian. It's a pietistic kind of like way to project this thing, right? It's like you're not actually being a good Christian if you ask these questions, because you have to go inward and you have to find something in you, which is what you guys have already demonstrated, which is your human faculties and knowledge.
Yeah.
But then it's a way to maybe just make his life a little easier. It has nothing to do with
answering your question.
Answering your questions at all.
Yeah. Hey, let me read a couple super chats real quick. Thurgood is in the house consistently. Drop another $99.99 super chat. Our diamond tier, our diamond tier supporter. Appreciate you, bro. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Michael Bell dropped the $2 super chat. Said, "Can't resist God's will. Free will not exist." Oh, can't resist God's will? Question mark. Free will not exist. Yep. Native Atheist dropped a $20 super chat. Thank you so much. Said, "This is real Sunday school." Appreciate you. Yes.
Thanks,
yep, indeed. Let me make an announcement too. This coming week, we're actually making a shift, and we got a great thing that I can't wait to do this week. We're actually going to shift the day that Exit Strategy. Al, I'm sorry, we didn't even talk to you about this because we asked you to join us this week for Exit Strategy. I hope you can join us this week for Exit Strategy, Al. But we actually have a need. Okay, we need to shift the day that Exit Strategy is happening, not just this week, but ongoing.
Yeah, in perpetuity.
So from now on, Exit Strategy is going to happen on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, no longer on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. So I'm going to put that in the chat. I'm going to post it to the YouTube page. If you can spread the word, Exit Strategy is now going to be on Thursdays at 8 p.m. And this Thursday, we're going to be joined by Albert. We are actually going to be taking a look at a video. Everybody's been talking about the whole Project 2025 piece, which is good that they're talking about it. But there's something that's even more alarming to me. Jay Witt actually turned me on to a video. If you want to watch it in advance, should we say what it is in advance, or just wait till Thursday? What do you guys think?
I think we should wait.
Okay.
We're gonna reveal.
just know we're going to be doing a reaction to a video that is
Crazy.
it's disgusting. This Thursday, it's actually a group of Christians who are the kinds of people who would support a Project 2025, but it's not about Project 2025 at all. It's about their political Christian identity.
Yeah.
And they're saying all the quiet parts out loud.
Yeah.
It is
On a
disturbing.
board. On a board, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
disturbing. So join us this Thursday, 8 p.m. for Exit Strategy. I'll find ways to try to keep reminding you. I know there are probably going to be people who tune in Tuesday, like, yo, what's going on? I'm going to post a note to the page so that you guys know.
For those of you who don't realize, what we're doing with Exit Strategy mostly is the application portion of the sermons in Nurch.
Yeah.
So we discuss the abstract doctrine and philosophy here in Nurch. And in Exit Strategy, we apply that to life. Like, how does that look? How does it look to live in the world knowing that people believe this BS?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, let's finish this off here. Go back to sharing Romans, and we are going to see. Paul says, hey, you, verse 14, you're going to say, is there injustice in God? By no means. God's the type that says, hey, I'm going to have mercy on whom I'm going to have mercy, compassion on whom I have compassion. I harden hearts. I fashion them too. I harden hearts so that I can get my glory. And then we go to verse 19. You will say to me then, well, then why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? But who are you, a man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Perish the thought. Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for beauty and another for menial use?
Yeah, can I stop you there?
Please.
So he says, the potter has needs which necessitate the creation of certain vessels for honorable and dishonorable use. I'm going to say that again. The potter has needs which necessitate the creation of certain vessels for honorable and dishonorable use. Cup can be made from the same clay for drinking, while another vessel can be made for defecation from the same clay, right?
Right.
But that's because the potter has different needs. Here, that's important. God, however, is said to possess aseity, an attribute of utter self-sufficiency and autonomy.
I used to love the attribute of aseity, the aseity of God. But go on.
Yep. In Acts 17, Paul says, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything.
Anything.
And, so now what you have to consider is Paul is using as an illustration a potter who has actual needs that necessitate when you're making a vessel out of clay. Yeah, perhaps I'll make from the same lump of clay some sort of pot for defecation, and then another will be a cup for drinking wine from the same
lump of clay.
From the same lump of clay, but it's necessitated by my needs.
And hold on, let me just add in there, because there's somebody who would try to escape this by saying it's not a need God had so much as it might have been a desire because it pleased him. But having a desire is really no different than having a need when you're talking about a being who has aseity. But go ahead.
If he had no need for creating the vessels of dishonor, but chose rather to make them anyway, it will only serve to highlight the cruelty of it all.
Yes.
I'll say that one last time.
Jay Witt, are you saying that God's aseity, right? We're all acknowledging that his self-sufficiency and all that, that you're saying it's wrong of him to make you feel like he needed you for a certain purpose.
That's an interesting thought. It's a different way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, for at one point, I thought to focus on the fact that unlike the clay, we're sentient. But then I thought, just logically, if we're working along with this, that the clay, part of the clay is our sentience. So just to point out that it's cruelty because we are conscious.
Go ahead. It just hit me. I love it.
Go ahead.
Because I've been having discussions with my mother little by little, just about the problem of evil and suffering in the world. And I haven't named it as that, but here's how we've been having these discussions. Every once in a while, I would say to my mother, I wish I could be a vegetarian. And she would say to me, why? I love meat. And I said, I gotta admit, I love eating meat too. I like the way that we season it and like the way, I just like eating meat, but I wish I was a vegetarian. She would say, why? And I said, because I hate to think about the animals that have to suffer so that I can have food on my plate. And she would say, but God, that's why God made them. He said in Genesis, I give all these animals to you for food. And so we've been having these discussions over the course of months of me just trying to point out how weird it is that a God would make animals for the purpose of us eating them. And we talk about evolution. I talk about how the fossil record shows the death that happened before the fall. So we can't blame the fall because her thing is always that only before the fall, God gave us vegetation. After the fall, he gave us animals. So she blames it on the fall. So all that's just backstory. One of the last points I've made in our ongoing conversation, I'd say to my mother is, okay, let's just say, scratch the fossil record, scratch all that. Let's just say God did give us these animals to eat for food. Why did God give the animals passions such that they run from being captured and they try to preserve their lives? And the zebra doesn't like it when it's young or attacked by lions. Why did God give the animals emotional attachments if his desire was for us to eat them as food? He could have made them having no sentience, no what we would call soul or no emotions, if he knew that we were going to be destroying them and that they were going to actually be preying on one another.
Yeah, it's an added layer of cruelty.
It's an added layer of cruelty. So transfer that to this, what we're talking about. If God was raising people up for the very purpose of destroying them, choosing some and not others, loving some and hating others, why give us these strong emotions that would only make it that much more the empathy or just our pathology? Like if he was going to be destroying us.
Like, understand, for those who aren't getting his point, if the purpose is simply to magnify your own glorious attributes, it's not furthered by the added layer of suffering and the creature. Think of the insect on your wall that is aware that you're going to swat it and it's fleeing. That awareness, and it's like a tree dropping in the forest. There's nobody other than that insect that's aware of the fright of you holding a flame next to it. In a similar way, nobody but you, if you're being chosen to damnation, you're going to illustrate his glory, right? And in relief to the vessels of honor. You're going to illustrate it just by virtue of being a vessel of honor. The only one who's going to know your terror is you.
Wow.
So to not only have the scheme for displaying your glory by contrast and relief with the vessels of honor be the end of it, but to, in the self-same act, have you experience a certain terror and fright and unbearable and incommunicable pain.
Wow.
It makes it a thing that is just, it's divine gore porn.
It's divine gore porn.
Porn. I like that.
Gore porn, yes.
Yeah, I love that.
At some point,
that's great.
He would be, if he has this attribute of omniscience, he would be the only one who could be aware of your terror, because outside of you. And so it's not like your terror is something that can be communicate. It's not a communicable thing to another audience. It's something that only you can have, and only he would know you have it through his attribute of omniscience. But let's in this.
No. No, we need to dwell on that, because what you're saying is, because I was going to say, go back to what we talked about at the beginning with the video. First, let me just say, David DeBoe sent a $10 super chat, said, great discussion, guys. And I went to like it, and by mistake, I deleted it. David, you don't need to re-super chat. You don't need to send. We definitely got the super chat came through. I deleted it by mistake. I was trying to like it. So thank you for the super chat, bro.
Thanks, David.
But in the beginning, the guy said, how would you feel if you were passed over by God? And I said, what do your feelings have to do with it? And then Jay Witt said, well, maybe the whole point of this is not to consider how the passed over, how the Esau's of the world would feel, but for the elect to be able to sit back and say, hey, I don't have to feel like them. I'm saved. I'm good. But Jay Witt, what you're saying is God could have given the elect this feeling of safety and assurance and, I was chosen, without giving the non-elect real feelings of terror and torture and the suffering that they're going to endure if they're non-elect. He could have done that without giving us the suffering, the real suffering.
Now, having said this, like I said, this is a matrix of thoughts that we've just unleashed. And it's probably a lot. Maybe some of you will have to rewind to really fully take in what we're saying. I'm going to restate what I said before this discussion, and obviously Brady can feel free to move where you will with things. But so the statement is, if he had no need for creating the vessels, now this is going back to his aseity, Acts 17. It's not that he needs anything, right? So if he had no need for creating the vessels of dishonor, but chose rather to make them anyway, it would only serve to highlight his cruelty.
It would only serve to highlight his cruelty. Yikes. Talk to us.
I didn't. Wow, there's a sub point. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's all good.
If the making known of the riches of his glory to vessels of mercies is reliant on the vessels seeing the relief/contrast between their treatment and that of others, he has now begun to rely on humans making logical deductions again. But he dismissed that earlier when he anticipated the objection of unfairness. He says our ability to deduce fairness is overridden by his prior insistence on his prerogative. Now he recruits human reasoning to legitimate the scheme. You understand what I'm saying? Do I need to read this again? Do I need to read it again?
No. I got it. I got it.
So if you understand what he's doing here, he's recruiting human reasoning to legitimate the scheme, because he's asking that he's saying that humans, in seeing this, will be able to greater appreciate or rationalize their way to understanding the vista of his, or the panorama of his glories. He's saying that that's going to be heightened. In other words, human reason plays a role in this. What I'm highlighting is that earlier he dismisses human reason when he says to the person who jumps up and says, well, this is unfair. He says, well, he doesn't have to play by the rules of your reasoning. It's a hyperlink back to the pastor who says, don't look for it to make sense. So he gives us the kibosh. He smashes us down when we say, look, that's not fair. But then he recruits your reasoning so that you can better appreciate the panorama of his glory. You understand? So it's
what it does is it produces in the believer a certain kind of, we said this in chapter 1 and chapter 2, a certain kind of illogical logic when you reason this way, because whatever sense in you that would arise up to question this scheme and say, this doesn't seem fair, you're now told not to trust or even listen to that part of you that thinks you could ask the question, but then you're told to trust yourself. So
Mhm.
you're sort of living in these two worlds of your thinking doesn't matter to God and your thinking does matter.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
wants you to think. He wants you to think so that you can better understand or appreciate his glory in this whole thing. But then when you use the same mind that you would have to use to do that, to understand, well, how does this make sense in fairness? He says, well, actually, that's when we hit the off switch on your mind. It doesn't have to make sense there.
Yeah.
It's insanity. It's insanity.
All right, let's go ahead. Go ahead. Al.
Yeah, no, I wanted to make a point because I when I read this last night, and I've been listening to, people like Dan McClellan and, Dan McClellan did a great piece recently about, the understanding of marriage and sex and from the Bible. And this whole idea of like ownership, right? And I think this idea of like humans owning other humans. And then it just like kind of dawned on me. It's like that's probably an ancient concept that I think a lot of us don't really understand anymore. And I think that's why when you have apologists trying to argue for these passages and the logic that's laid out, is that they're not even really tapping into that, like how distorted that is. Like, you know what I mean? Like how prevalent this idea of like, you can actually, and the thing is, you don't have to be a slave. I think this whole idea of like, the father owns the family, and then above that there's a magistrate that owns the people, right? And then you kind of, so what you're dealing with is these like multiple layers of ownership. And then what Paul is arguing is that ultimately at the top of the list is God.
Yeah.
God owns everything.
Yeah.
But when you really take that into account, it's like now what you've established, Paul, and what the ancients have established is that the question of justice is completely different than what we conceive of it today. I think it doesn't even relate. And I think what Dan McClellan does, I think, in a lot of his videos is that we can't, like when we negotiate with the text as 21st century people, we're going to infuse so much of our common understanding today, which does not comport at all and align with, and the fact that these ancient texts don't speak to how we think about it today at all. And I think that's like one of the greatest contributions that people like him do to the conversation. But overall, I think Jay Witt, what you described, Brady, what you described here is like you're looking at somebody who says, I fucking own you. I can do whatever the fuck I want with it, and you're gonna just sit there, and it's gonna be a display of my abilities, my greatness, blah blah blah. And then I was like thinking about it now, and as you were describing it, Jay Wood, I was like, how is that not a recipe for a revolt? Right? It's like
especially to people that you've given sentience to.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like if you're gonna have sentience, if you're gonna have people who have the experience to experience any kind of suffering of any kind by your hand, that's a recipe for apostasy.
Hold on.
Paul anticipates that though, right? He anticipates
hold
that.
on.
And
yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm just thinking though. I just had a thought, and it came and it left me that quick.
Oh shoot!
Damn, it was
shoot.
No, I love what you said, Al. Like
a recipe for apostasy, right? That's the last thing I said, or the recipe for revolt.
Right, you're giving people sentience, but you're telling them you're only. Oh, here's what the thought was: you're only going to do what I made you to do. But on top of that, you're also going to be a hidden God. So the only way that they're going to know, go back to Moses, right? I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. That whole chapter of Exodus 33, I think it is. Oh my gosh, this is so convoluted, y'all. Think about this.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the Exodus story happened. There's no historical evidence that this great number of people of Israel was in Egypt and made this exodus and all that. The story is being told generations after the fact, looking back to try to give the current generation a national identity. That's what's happening. But nonetheless, in the story of Exodus, you have these people who are being told, hey, God's not going to go up with us because we're such a rebellious and stiff-necked idolatrous people.
Mhm.
And if God were to travel with us, he'd end up killing us. What's the point of that story? The point is for the people in the future who are reading it to say, oh, that's why God's not present with us, because we're so disobedient. If he was present, he would end up killing us. So it's ideology to make them feel good about the fact that this God who we're supposedly following is not present.
Right.
But even in the story, when God does get present, he only gets present with Moses. And even with Moses in the story, it's, okay, God, I need to see your face. God said, okay, I'm going to have mercy on whom I'm going to have mercy. So I'm going to show myself to you. But even you can't see my face.
It's
I'm going
Schrodinger's cat.
to cover you so you can only see my back.
My
so what
ass.
it's doing is my ass. I'm gonna show you my ass, Moses. But what it's doing is it's instilling in the mindset of a people, get used to a God who we're only going to hear from through intermediaries. And even the intermediaries can't see God's face. So what the whole Old Testament ends up becoming is ideology for the absence of God. Why we can't see him, why even our leaders couldn't see his face, because if they saw him, they would die. But God's going to have mercy on whom he's going to have mercy on. This goes back to the point I was just making. This is a God who's saying, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want with you. And you can't even see me. I'm only going to show you myself through intermediaries. It's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for rebellion, because I'm supposed to just sit here and take this, and you're never going to show up. You're going to have mercy on whom you will. And even those people can't see your face. And we just got to sit here and take it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Romans 9, in light of everything you're just saying, is theodicy. It's Paul being the first apologist. This whole thing is, and you see it in his anticipation of objections. So even in the audience, as what Al so aptly described, that was primed to accept autocratic dictatorship coming from heaven, divine autocracy.
Yeah.
Even in the audience that already was set up, they believed that a woman was owned or whatever, you know, like this kind of, even there in that audience, think about this. This isn't a 40-year argument. He, even among those folks, anticipated the objection. Wait a second, this isn't fair. Just think about that. It makes sense that you would expect that nowadays, because we haven't been conditioned to think of people being owned by people and slaves and stuff here, at least here in the West. But even among people who accepted slavery as an ethical way of dealing with life, he anticipated even among them being like, wait a second, this scheme that you're unfolding is not fair. Just think about how bad the scheme had to be for him to anticipate an audience objecting to it. And then recognize this is theodicy. This is apologetics being employed. Romans 9 is the first time he actually gets into real life apologetics. He's saying, I know that that what you read in Exodus 9 is shit. I know that what you read in Exodus 33 is shit. But guess what? This is why it makes sense. And just like the apologists of today, his explanation doesn't make it any better. It's the car that's stuck in the snow, in the ditch. And then when you press on the gas, it only digs it further down into the ditch.
Well, let's prove that point. We got 15 minutes to get out of here so we can make this a 2-hour episode. He's going to do very much more of what you just said, right? You said he's looking at the Hebrew scriptures, saying, wait, I know that doesn't really add up, especially look at where we are on the world stage. We thought we'd have a redeemer by now. We thought we'd have someone like Moses come and rescue us by now, and we're still not. Let me try to see if I can make it make sense now. He's going to press the gas and dig the car further into the ditch. So let's see this. Verse 22, what if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known, I got to stopping myself. I'm gonna leave the comment alone. What if God, it's hard not to make this comment. I'll do it quickly. What if God desiring, the whole idea of God desiring goes against God's aseity. So just go think about that on your own at some point. But what if God desiring to show his wrath and also to make known his power has endured with much patience the vessels of wrath made for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory. We just talked about that, right? God fashioning these different pieces of clay for what he wanted to use. Even us, whom he has called, not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles. This is what he was building up to. All of that stuff he was saying in the verses previously. Why can people who were not part of the physical people be part of the promise? Well, because people who were part of the physical people were not part of the promise. So God's free to do whatever he wants with these people that he made.
Right.
Not Jews only, but also from the Gentiles, as indeed he says in Hosea, those who were not my people, I will call my people, and her who was not beloved, I will call her my beloved. And in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. Now, here's where he's digging the wheels deeper into the ditch. If you go back to Hosea and read this, he is in no way, shape, or form talking about Gentiles. He is strictly talking about Israel being judged, Israel being treated like not God's people, but then Israel being redeemed and brought back and called God's people. Paul is now grouping Gentiles into this as if to say, this is what the Hebrew scriptures meant all along. This is BS. This is why very many Jews would have heard Paul and say, what are you talking about? Go ahead, Al.
You know what's so naive about Christians is that if God can do this to Jews, why would he not do the same thing to yourself as a Christian? That never crosses their mind. It's never crossed my mind. So naive. That's so naive.
It's like the man who's got a wife, and cheats on his wife with you, and then you marry him thinking he won't do the same thing to you.
Exactly.
Like you met him while he was married.
Exactly. Holy crap! Never saw this before in this chapter.
It's like there's a sense in which it's the infinite regress with this kind of thing. If you really start thinking about it logically, where you just it's like forever, ever. Like it's like
yeah.
It's never ending. Yeah, I get it for sure.
One more caveat I'll say here, and we're almost done here. When I was a Christian, there were times when I tried to go back to the Old Testament, whenever the New Testament, when Jesus or Paul would quote Old Testament verses, and I would go back and I'd be like, damn, this don't seem to be what they say in here though. And I would just chalk it up to, who are you, old man, to question God. I'm like, I guess there's a spiritual, like the preacher we just saw. If you try to understand God using your human knowledge, you're never going to understand God. So I'm like, damn, my human knowledge is the only knowledge I got. But I guess I got to forego that and just, I got some other kind of understanding I got to use here.
Exactly.
It does feel like there is a certain waste, needless waste, in going to an older revelation and superimposing on it something it never intended. Then the question comes, especially to a person like Paul, who people think is inspired, why do you even have to quote the old passage? Like, it's not that you're bringing something out of the passage that's there, you're superimposing something onto it. So it's like, well, of course we know the answer is, because just like we've discussed many times, there's a culture of people who feel like if you're going to make a point, it has to be made through this book. And that's the reason for Nurch anyway. It's like, we're going to use your very book to show you, because we know that you can't see it unless we show it to you through your book.
Excellent.
Like, if we're going to show you that it doesn't work, incidentally, that's how I left it. I was not one of these people who just left because I wasn't feeling it or whatever. I had to use the book to refute itself.
That's why I wrote Let There Be Gaslight, because I knew, and when I was on with Myth Vision, with Derek from Myth Vision, he asked me what scholars helped me get to where I am. And he thought I was going to name people like Gurmerkin or McDonald or the people that he typically has on. I said, no, it was all evangelical scholars that helped me get to where I was at.
That's
And,
amazing.
and let there be
Amazing.
gaslight. I quote all evangelical scholars
Right.
from all different slices of science, whether they're creationists or whether they're theistic evolutionists. Because I knew, like Jay would said, I had to be able to show myself, because I was a biblicist. And for the people in my Christian community, I had to be able to show how the book itself leads you here.
Exactly.
Yep. And this is what Paul is doing. Paul is basically saying, if I'm going to feed you my bullshit, I have to, even if it's going to be total superimposition, like, understand what Brady just said. You don't find that in that passage. It's not there. But the only way he can talk his shit is he has to use the book to do it, because he knows his audience is a certain audience. It's like, but is it in the book? And he said, he assures them, it's in the book. And like the clip I used to play, am I in the book? Yes, it's in the book. It's like, is it really in the book? And like, if you can empty the words of their actual meaning and just, if you can use them like the pots of clay that he's describing in his passage, the words in the passage can just be empty pots that you can fill with. Today I can fill it with Kool-Aid. Tomorrow it can be filled with Dom Perignon. It can be like, the words just become a shell. They end up having a mystical character where they can be filled.
I'm sorry. In the chat, please drop a note, y'all. Isn't it good to no longer have to be one of those people of the book, where if somebody can just show you it in the book, then you got to go with it? Isn't it good to no longer have to be a person of the book?
Yep. And they aren't people of the book. That's the irony of it. That's what we realize.
Exactly.
If the words are just empty pots that you can fill with whatever meaning you want them to mean, like Paul is doing here, are they even in the book? What is the book? We pointed out earlier,
what is the book?
The book doesn't have any periods.
It's another Schrodinger's
capital letters.
It's a Schrodinger's cat, man. Is it there or is it not there?
Is it there? It's there and it isn't at the same time.
The second you choose to observe it the way you choose to observe it, all of a sudden, it's there.
It's there.
It's
exactly.
There. But if you choose not to see it, like us,
hold on, y'all. We gotta do an episode on that. That's gotta be an episode.
Yes.
The Bible as Schrodinger's cat. We've got to do it.
Yes,
we've got to do it.
Yeah. All right. It's like we have this book of spells, and however you choose to read it, it's a choose your own adventure. However so long as you can find your adventure somehow. And this is the problem. I remember among Reformed people, they used to have a huge issue with people who allegorize. I think it was Matthew. Is it Matthew Henry who had his commentary? If I'm mistaken, it was Matthew Henry, right? And, one of the problems they pointed out with Matthew Henry is they thought he over allegorized. But where did Matthew Henry learn it from?
As we just said, Paul used Israel as an allegory, right?
Right.
Just in this chapter.
Yes. So he learned. So people like Matthew Henry would have probably countered their attack on him and saying, "Look, I learned it from the best of them. I sat with the big boss. I sat with Paul."
Hey, go back. It's the 80s, right? Where'd you get this marijuana from? Why are you smoking this marijuana? You, all right? I learned it by watching you. All right, let's get out of here. All right.
Let's get out.
Verse 27, and Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will be saved, for the Lord will execute his sentence upon the earth with rigor and dispatch. And as Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left us children, we would have fared like Sodom and been made like Gomorrah. Go back to David's point
that's the
earlier.
paradox. Yeah.
Go ahead.
What are you saying?
The point you made earlier about him using this remnant idea and using the remnant to make his point. This is sort of what you were talking about here in Isaiah.
Yeah, and understand, he starts off with the promise to Abraham, which is broad in its scope. The innumerable inheritance he's going to have, or offspring. And here, it's the paradox. Here in Isaiah, he's saying, if I didn't leave you just a morsel, you would have been like Sodom. There wouldn't be anybody. In other words, if I didn't leave you a remnant, nobody would be saved. So basically, he's got the plenty and he has the few. So somehow what Paul is doing, he's tying the two together and saying, like, both are true. It's like, which one is true? Yes. They're both true. They're both
Yeah.
true, right?
Right. Exactly.
4 verses left.
Okay.
Verse 30. What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it. That is righteousness through faith. But Israel, that Israel who pursued righteousness, which is based on the law, did not succeed in fulfilling that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it through faith, but as if it were based on works. They have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone that will make men stumble, a rock that will make them fall. And he who believes in him will not be put to shame. And I read it that way on purpose because the original passage in Isaiah does not say he who believes in him. Paul and Peter, when you see the same verse quoted in Peter, they add in him. Because in Isaiah, it simply says, and he who believes will not be put to shame. And this is the kind of thing that when I was a Christian, I would go back and say, well, then the Old Testament doesn't say he who believes in him.
Right.
But the New Testament does. I guess they've got some kind of spiritual insight that I'm not privy to. But this is them pouring. This is Wim VDB in the chat said the Rorschach Bible. This is Paul making the Hebrew Bible a Rorschach. I'm going to see in it what I want. And I see in him. So I'm going to add that into my quote here.
Right.
And this is why people believe there's a univocal voice in the text. This is the passages like this, because Paul proof texts his points using a passage. He's pulling from here and there, and people are saying, look, see, Paul thought there was one voice from Genesis to Revelation, basically. I mean, obviously they didn't have Revelation at the time, but if they would have said, Paul is considering there being the same author, even though he's quoting Isaiah, he's quoting Hosea, he's quoting Genesis. Now he sees it as a singular voice. So the Christian feels justified in presenting us proof texts from all over the text. And when we insist that, you have to read Genesis in context of Genesis and this, they'll say, no, that's not the way Paul read it. You see, that's one of the reasons why they ended up with this.
So what's interesting, Jay Witt, is that this actually kind of mirrors what we did with the Serious Man, because, Romans 9 basically tries to explain something. You can't really understand it anyway. And then by the end of chapter 9, he says, it's because you didn't live by faith anyway. So it's all your response. It's like, you can't understand it, but it's all your responsibility.
What do you say? Anyway. What do you say on the Serious Man? He said, it doesn't make sense, or you're not going to understand it.
No, he says, even though you can't understand this, you'll be fully responsible for the midterm. That's what he says.
Wow. But no, that's a great point, Jay Witt. This whole idea about the way he's bringing faith, or was it you, Al, that just said that?
All good.
I forgot who, But the idea of bringing faith in, because what he's doing is he's invalidating Israel's entire history of trying to keep this law. They're now invalidated, and the Gentiles who never had that history are now validated, but they're validated through faith, and now Israel has to get on board and come through faith as well. So your understanding, your acceptance, your election, all of this is going to be through this new faith thing, not the thing that we grew up as Jews, he's saying to them, thinking it was all about.
Yeah. And now, and this will be the last thing I say about that, but think about this, listener, as we part. If it wasn't important that you actually understand or make sense of it all, why the hell did he write all these verses trying to explain it to you?
Right.
Just think about that. Because he basically negates him having to even give you any reason or rationale for any of it.
Yet he gives you all this reason and rationale.
It's like, hey, and now it says here. Basically, you're trying to make logical points. You're appealing to reason. So don't let them do the bait and switch on you. Don't let them approach you when you're in conversation with them and saying to you, hey,
absolutely,
it doesn't have to make sense. And then have apologists. This is exactly what they do. They tell you it's faith-based. It doesn't have to make sense. And then as the reputations come forward, they start engaging in actual battle, logical battle. And you're like, wait a second, we come back to the same paradox. Like, which one is it? It's like what you said when Satan's Guide quoted us on exit strategy. It's like, you said something that summed this up perfectly. Forget what the quote was, but it was essentially
if reasons don't do it for you, it was never about
it was something
he was quoting one of you basically.
Yeah, I don't even remember what I said.
Saying basically, reason that you didn't get in this but like, if reasons don't end up doing the job, just understand it wasn't about that anyway. And it's like, you're basically hedging it in a way where it's totally non-falsifiable. Yeah. Like, you see what he just engaged in. At the beginning, objections come. He says, look, he told you he's not going to be fair. And then he goes about trying to explain how it's a fair system and why it makes sense. It's like, why the fuck are you arguing all of these points if he doesn't have to make them? Because like your initial, at the beginning of this conversation, you made it clear. He said, look, I don't have to be fair. I can do whatever the hell I feel like doing. Literally, I can do the hell. I can send you to hell.
Yeah. Why are you appealing to my reason?
Yeah.
At the same time telling me my reason doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's Christianity.
Yeah. Yep.
That's it
in a nutshell. In a nutshell.
Yep.
And we got a super chat from Mikey Two Hearted, $9.99. Thank you so much. Said,
thanks,
Mikey.
Dropping by to show some love. Have to catch Nurch tomorrow. So thanks so much for sliding through and showing that love. Definitely appreciate it. To reiterate, exit strategy is moving from Tuesdays at 8 p.m. to now Thursdays at 8 p.m. This Thursday, we're going to be joined by Albert Kim to react to a video that you definitely want to have seen. You definitely want to know that people are out there thinking and saying these things, and you want to stick around for this reaction. So join us this Thursday at 8 p.m. Any last thoughts, fellas?
This has been, I think this has been a great, Romans 9 to me was one of those things where it's like, it's such a singular chapter to really force to deal with.
Yeah.
I really, really liked where we took it today. So
agree. Yeah. Agree wholeheartedly.
So, yep.
All right, folks. Oh, Kathy came through with the last with a $9.99 super chat. Every little bit helps. I'm very late, but sending love to all. Thank you so much, Aunt Kathy. And hey, you guys have a great Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your week. And for those who are not watching it on Sunday, enjoy your day. We'll get with you. Peace.